Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go to AutoCAD, and we're going to open up that drawing, the sample drawing. So I'm going to open up this one called Layout Demo. So what this little drawing, it just represents a drawing that you have in model space. Okay, so a couple things about it. You're going to work primarily in model space, which is what this tab is showing us right here. And when we go to plot, instead of plotting for model space from now on, what you'll use is this concept of layout, which was originally called paper space back in the day when they first came up with this. So you'll probably hear me use the term paper space as opposed to layout, but you know, it's exactly the same thing. This stuff wasn't developed until about release 12. So prior to that, everything was plotted through model space, and I'll kind of explain why that process is. Your model also is very important to be fractured out in layers. Okay, so instead of just using everything on the same layer in different colors, that doesn't really work very well in paper space. So I mean, that's why layers become very important. And as we get into Civil 3D, you're going to see layers as an incredibly diverse thing in that, because they just have layers all over the place. So if we look at this little drawing, if you've had a chance to open it up, and like I said, if you're not using that with AutoCAD, you can always just do this later after the fact. But this guy's fractured out. We have layer 1. So notice if I freeze layer 1, that piece of the drawing freezes. Layer 2, that piece of my drawing freezes. And layer 3, let's see.
Recording in progress.
That piece of the drawing will freeze as well. Okay, so we can see that that thing's all fractured out. Okay, so so what I'm going to do is we're going to take a look at several commands today. One is called tile mode, and tile mode was developed primarily to be able to switch you from model space and paper space. But what we're going to look at is what I would call pre-release 12, before we actually had models paper space. So what kind of drove the paper space concept was 3D drafters, because they would like to work in multiple views, say like a top view and a side view, bottom view. And so this is just what we would call a single view right here. So we really weren't able to do that. But there is a way to break your screen up into multiple views. So if you would, at the command line, you can just type in the word vports, V-P-O-R-T-S, and you hit enter. And what you'll notice is we have what are called viewports that we can create. So you are actually working in what's called a single viewport right now. But when we go to several viewports, what it's going to do is actually break your screen up into multiple screens. So what you'll have is the basically ability to work in each screen individually, even though it's all on the same model. Okay. So if I would click on 3 left, what that does is gives me a dominant view to the left and 2 lesser views top bottom here. So when I click on 3 left, hit OK, what you should notice is that you now have a 3-screen view, essentially. So only one of these views is active at a time. So notice when I'm over here, you can see the highlighted border around the screen. This guy's active, and you also notice my cursor becomes a crosshair. If I bring it over to this one, it's no longer active, but all you have to do is just left click in it, and that one now becomes the active view, and this one will become the active view. So this allows you to work on the same model in multiple views, in particular, like I said, for 3-dimensional type drafting, that's very important, top, side, bottom views. I can also have different scale factors in here. So if I come over here and I just type in Z, Enter, E, that gives me a extents view. I can come over here, Z enter E, that's also an extents view. And that one didn't work, try it again. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. Z enter E, okay, that's an extents view. And then I can come down here, Z enter E. So I can have them all in the same view extents, or I can come in and zoom them in or out, okay? So that was all good and well to work, but the problem is because only one of these screens is active, you can only print one of these. And that became a problem because while I'm modeling, I want to be able to model different views, but I also want to be able to plot these views all at the same time. That's very important, but this process did not allow me to do that. Okay, so I could have scale factors that were different. I could work in different views, but I could only plot one of them because effectively only one of these is active at a time. All right, everybody get the idea? So, okay, good. So the other thing is that layering is kind of a problem too, because if I go up here to the layer control dialog box, and let's say I freeze layer 1, what you should notice is that it froze across the board in all viewports. And that's a problem because I may want to have layer 1 thawed in this viewport, but frozen in these two viewports. And with this process, you can't do that. So this is typically what's referred to as a global freeze. Globally means across the board everywhere. So you're going to see when we get in the paper space, what they've done is they've added another freeze option, okay, freeze thaw. So actually we're going to also see alternate color options too. So you can have a base color and then an override color. So they've really done some pretty cool stuff when we get into paper space. So the thing is that this worked to a point, but it doesn't work across the board for everything people need to do. So back in release 12, programmers were probably barraged by users that said, look, this just isn't doing what we need it to do. So they came up with this concept of paper space and model space. And in order to do that, they also had to develop a system variable called the tile mode system variable, which is still there, but we don't really necessarily need to use it. I'll show you how that works here in a sec. So what we're going to do is let's go back, if you're following with me, just click on your dominant view. And what we're going to do is go back to a single viewport. So I'm just going to type in viewports, go to a single viewport, and hit OK. So notice those viewports, as we looked at those viewports were considered to be tiled. So what that essentially means is that they cannot be irregularly shaped, just like tile that you would tile with a bathroom. It's going to be basically rectangles or squares. And you can't, with those viewports, you can't have them anything other than tiled squares. So what we're going to see is when we get into paper space, we can have untiled viewports and they can be irregularly shaped. Okay, so that's why there's that term, what we call tile mode. So what tile mode did originally, you didn't have tabs down here. Okay, you had no tabs. So to get into paper space, you had to type in a system variable called tile mode. So if we just type in tile, T-I-L-E-M-O-D-E, tile mode, and hit enter, you'll notice that when you hit enter, the current status of tile mode is 1. So that's binary for on. So what that means, when you have tile mode on, that means you're locked into model space. Okay. If you change this to 0, it'll flip you over to what we call paper space or layout. And you can do the same thing much easier by just clicking on the layout tab. Okay, so we don't have to worry about tile mode at all, but I just wanted to show you that it's actually still out there. For instance, if you lose your model space paper layout tabs, you can still get back and forth between tile mode and that because those guys will be active. Okay, is everybody good with that so far? Okay, so what we're going to take a look at is paper space, which is a much better way of dealing with your model. It allows you to have multiple untiled viewports. It allows you to have different scale factors. It allows you to have layering capabilities that are frozen in one but thawed in the other. And it also gives me the flexibility of plotting from one spot, which we're going to plot from our layout. And everything we plot then from that point on is always one-to-one. So we'll never have to worry about a scale factor as long as we zoom our viewports in at the proper scale. Okay. So there's a couple of ways to get into paper space. Like I said, one of the easiest ways is to just click on this layout tab. So before we do that, let's go ahead and we're going to hit the escape key because I want to clear the tile mode. So it should say nothing down here. And we're not going to click on this yet. Okay, if you have, just go back to model space. I want to show you a couple of settings that are somewhat important for you. And once you set these up, if you're setting these up at your home computer, then you'll be good to go and you won't have to set these again unless you change it. So these are option settings that we're going to set. Now, by the way, when we get into Civil 3D, we're also going to be utilizing this paper space concept, but it does a lot more of the information for you, so you don't have to do quite as much setup and stuff as we get into this. But it's still going to be important to know what we're doing here. Okay, so I want you to take your cursor anywhere into the graphics screen in the model space. We're going to right click and we're going to go to options, or you can just type in the word options. Either way, it works just as effectively. Okay, so lots of good stuff here in the options dialog box. By the way, if you haven't spent time in here, this is a good place to look for certain stuff. But we're going to navigate to the display tab. And at the bottom of the display tab, lower left-hand corner here, you see layout elements. So layout elements are going to be dealing with how paper space looks to us. Okay. So notice the first thing is display layout and model tabs. You typically always want to have this on because if you turn it off, you're going to lose these guys. And if you do, you can still use tile mode. Okay, you can still use your tile mode system variable, but it's so much easier to have that on. Now, unless you're working for a dedicated company where they do everything the same way, a lot of times what I suggest is we just turn the rest of these off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off this printable area. I'm going to turn off the paper background. I'm going to turn off Show Page Setup Manager. And what I typically don't want AutoCAD to do for me, I do not want it to create viewports, okay? So we're going to toggle these off. So once you toggle these off once, they're going to stay that way because these are system variables that run with the system. So every time you open up AutoCAD, this will be set. Now, when we get to the school on Wednesday, and if we're doing this stuff, because that's probably not turned off by default, you may have to run in there and do that same thing. Okay, so usually once I get those set, I'm going to hit apply and just okay that. Okay, so we're all good now. We're going to go into paper space, and what we're going to look at, let me flip over here a minute. Okay, so what we've looked at is this is our model that we've already drawn. And notice I've already drew this for you, but this is the representative of the sizes. You've got a radius here of 7.5, diameter there, and so you can see that's how that was drawn. And this was all layered out, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3 with unique colors. So what we're going to look at now is creating these things that are called viewports. Okay, so these viewports are different than the viewports that we just looked at. The viewports that we just looked at, the best way of thinking of those is those are physical screens. So you're just taking a screen and breaking it up into multiple screens. These viewports that exist in paper space or layout mode, these are actually going to be objects. Now they look like rectangles, and ideally you're going to use probably a rectangle type of shape the most, but they can be irregular shape, they could be circles, they could be a real irregular polyline. And so sometimes that's advantageous to do that. So I'm going to have these created, and I'm going to explain this too. The process I'm using is kind of reverse to the way you actually would probably do it in the real world. Usually you insert your title block first, and then you bring in your viewports inside of your title block. But because of the way I'm just presenting this, we're just kind of doing it a little bit backwards, okay? So I'm going to develop 3 viewports, and we're going to use those coordinates. And again, most people don't actually use coordinates. They just kind of eyeball them in. But I'm doing this just so that it'll fit our title block. So we're going to have one that's going to be that 0.1, 0.1, that's XY, to the upper right corner will be 5 to 745. Then we're going to do this one that'll be 5.1, 4.1 to an upper corner of 8.25 and 745. And then the lower viewport, you can see the numbers there. I'm just writing these down so that we can use them. But again, remember, most people do the title block first, and then you just kind of eyeball these things in, because once you get them in, you can grip them and size them really simply, okay? So the other thing about viewports, they are objects, okay? They're an object just like any other object when you're in paper space. So they're like a line or an arc or a circle or any other type of object. So you want to manage them like you would any other object. So that means creating layers for them uniquely, and also assigning colors and visibilities and all of that good stuff. Because one of the things about viewports is you typically never want to print them. It's kind of like you don't really care that those are out there, and you don't want somebody else to see what you've done with them. It's just, they're kind of like stuff that you just don't want to share. So they're just a graphical way. So think of them also, as we create these viewports, besides being an object, think of them as a camera object. And each viewport's going to be a camera that's going to be focused on the model at some view and also at some scale factor representation. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the layers here, and I'm going to create myself a new layer. So I like to call this layer viewports. I always call it something that I can recognize, and I always like to make it an outrageous color, something that I know that is different, okay? So I'm going to make mine magenta. I mean, you can make it any color you'd like, and also, you can call it anything you want, but just I like to name it so that I know that what it is. The other thing is, we're going to not want this to plot. So what we're going to do is go in here where it says plot, and we're going to set this to a no plot viewport, or a no plot layer. And be careful when you do that if you know anything about no plots. If you create another layer right now, and that layer is the current layer, the new layer that you create will also be no plot, okay? Another trick that people will use, if you see this def points layer right there, you can put your viewports on the def points layer, and the beauty of that is that's an automatic no plot layer. And if you're not familiar with that layer, that has to do with dimensioning. We're going to talk about that next week. So I'm just going to have you guys create a viewports layer, make it a color, set it no plot, and also make it current, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and close my layer dialog box. Make sure it shows you viewports up there as your current layer. All right, is everybody ready?
Yep.
All right.
How did you create that layer? What was the, it was just some one click, wasn't it?
Go up to the Layer Properties Manager. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, click on that. It should open up that dialog box.
Okay.
And see over here, there's your layer creation tool
Okay.
right there. Okay, you just click on it, it'll make a new layer. It usually will just automatically call it layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. And you can let it ride with those layer names if you want. You can also change the name after the fact. Okay.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. All right, so got my layer created. And you know, here's the thing, it's just like anything else. If you forget to do that, it's going to just create these viewports on whatever layer is current. You can always move them after the fact. Okay, so don't get too concerned about them. They're not that big of a deal. So we're going to go to layout now, and all we have to do is click on that. And you should basically just see a blank piece of paper. Is that true for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, so here's the cool thing. You are now really truly on a piece of paper, but we don't see our model. We shouldn't see our model at all, because what we have to do is basically rip holes in this paper to be able to see into it. So really, you are kind of now, you have two different dimensions in AutoCAD. You have the paper space dimension, or the paper space world, and you have the model world. And what happens in the model is separate from what happens in the paper, okay? Also, this is a strictly 2D world, so any 3D commands are now disabled. And you can tell also that you're in paper space by the fact that this UCS icon now has changed look. So that's a paper space UCS icon. If I look back here, there's my model space UCS icon. So they're completely different. So 3D world, 2D world, okay? Is anybody seeing their model right now?
No.
Good. If you did see your model, what you did is you probably didn't set your options, what I did, and it created a viewport. So then it allows you to see in there, okay? All right, so also, just to check this out, if you type in the word tile mode right now, and you hit enter, you'll notice that the variable has now been set to 0. And that's just because you clicked on the layout tab. So you can type in tile mode and set it to 1, you'd go back to model space. So if I set it to 1, I'm back in model space, all right? So a couple other things. There is only one model space, okay? There's only one universe in AutoCAD, that's the model space, but there's multiple interpretations of that universe if you want to, and that's what paper space is. And I could have 20 tabs down here, okay? So if I had an apartment building, let's say, and I had 20 floors, I could have a tab for each floor, even though it's just one model. So that's also kind of cool, because your drawing file is then just one drawing file, not multiple drawing files. And anything that happens on the model is reflected automatically in the viewports. All right, so enough talking. Let's go ahead. We're going to create some viewports. Now, you can use the vports command that we just used before, but it's not very good when you're creating viewports. So they have another command out there called mview, make view. And if you just type in mview, okay, and hit enter, you get this command line driven viewport creation tool. And this gives you a lot more flexibility than the vports command. Okay, so I suggest you use this, and it seems that AutoCAD is kind of pushing us to use the vports command, but this one works so much better because there's all these sub options here. So if you have viewports on, you can turn them off or on. You can fit them. You can lock them, which will be very important. You can select objects like a circle and turn it into a viewport. Polygonal makes you or allows you to create irregular shaped viewports. Or you can just create by numbers. So what we're going to do over here at the command line, we're going to type in some coordinates. So what I want you to do is type in 0.1, comma 0.1 and hit enter. And that should lock you into the corner. Notice it's just like a rectangle at this point. And we're going to use the upper right corner at 5, comma 7.45. And I'm getting those numbers off of that other sheet. And also, like I said, most people don't actually deal with that. So they just eyeball them, but they typically also will have their title block in first. So like I said, we're just kind of doing it backwards. So you should at this point now see a viewport that has been created, and you are actually looking at your model. So if you click on this viewport, you'll notice it's an object, just like any other object. I can move it, I can scale it, I can erase it, because it's just a camera, okay? Also what it did when you created it, it zoomed the model in at extents view of that viewport. Okay, so that model is not sitting there at 1-to-1 right now. It's sitting at an extents view. Did everybody get that to work all right?
Yep.
So if you try to select your model right now, you'll notice you can't because it's behind. You can think of it, I like to think of it that it's kind of like behind glass, you know, like a fish would be in an aquarium. You're looking at that fish, but you can't touch him. So if you go into the viewport and you double click, you're now in model space, okay? And when they first developed this, they called this floating model space, which I really like that term because this model space right here is different than that model space essentially because you're looking at it through paper space. But if I go back to the layout, notice I'm in model space. If I double click outside of the viewport, I'm in paper space, okay? I can select the viewport object when I'm in paper space, and I can't select the model object if I'm in model space. I can't select the viewport object. Okay, so when you're in the two different dimensions, they stay separate. Okay, is everybody okay with that? We're going to go ahead and double click outside, make sure we're outside, because first of all, MView will not work if you're in model space. So if you are in model space and try to issue the MView command, it'll tell you that it doesn't work or it's invalid in model space. So we're going to create another viewport here. So I'm going to go to MView again. You can just type in, by the way, MV, and MV is the alias for MakeView. All right, we're going to do another one, and I'm going to use coordinates again. So I'm using 5.1, 4.1, 5.1, 4.1. That's the lower left corner. And I'm going to bring up the upper right corner at 8.25, 7.45. Okay, and I should have another model space viewport. And notice again, there's my model, just like we saw before, except these are now like two separate cameras that we've placed. We're going to do one more, MView again, and we're going to go 5.1, 8.25, and 8.25. Oops, I made a mistake on that. Let me redo that. Just go ahead and hit the escape key. I was looking at my paper wrong. Let's do that again. MView. I want to use 5.1, 0.1. Yeah, that's good. And then the upper right corner is going to be 8.25, 4. So when you get done with those, if you do a zoom extents, you can fill your screen, and what you see are the three viewports. There's one viewport, 2, and 3. And we should see our model clearly in all of the three viewports. And if you double click in each viewport, that one's active, that one's active, and that one's now active. Okay? Is everybody getting that to work? Anybody questions?
So I got kicked off for just a minute. So at the beginning of this was all through the MView command, which is in your paper space to be able to see your model. Is that right?
Well, you have to, yeah, what it does, it allows you to create a model space viewport, right? Yeah. So keep in mind what you're doing is you're actually creating an object here, okay? Are you following me?
Yes, sir.
And you are using MView, correct? You could use the vports command to do this, but it's just, you have no flexibility with it. It doesn't give you the same quality of options, let's put it that way. Okay, that's probably the best way of explaining it. All right. Anybody else questions? Okay, I'm just going to show you some things about these viewports, which are pretty cool. remember they're just like cameras, and what you can do is I can click on a viewport and I can move it anywhere I want. I can grip on the viewport, just hit the grip, and I can resize it to a bigger size. I'll do something here. I'm going to keep getting that thing that's showing up. I can grip it, I can move it, I can do a lot of different functions. I can even delete them. So it doesn't hurt my model, remember, because the model is not what you're, if I delete it, like that. One thing about a viewport, you could actually have a viewport inside of a viewport. That's not a good idea ever, okay? So even if you're going to have viewports that overlap, always leave a little bit of the one viewport outside of the other, okay? Now also notice these look like they're tiled, but they don't have to be. You can make irregular shaped viewports. I'll show you how to do that at the end. Because when I have real crazy boundaries, particularly like with surveying type boundaries, a lot of times I'll create an irregular viewport around that because I don't want to be able to have everything showing up in a rectangle. Especially, let's say I've got contours that are spilling out here. I don't necessarily want those contours to go out there. So I could literally draw a viewport that would be shaped like that and clip it. So you can think of those as clipping types of things. Okay, is everybody okay with that? All right, so let's talk about scale factors. So the idea is that you're going to have this on a sheet of paper, 11 by 17, 24 by 36, whatever, and you want to send that paper at 1-to-1 scale to the printer. So the way we handle that is we're going to zoom the model in at a particular scale so that when it works on the paper, I'm plotting 1-to-1, but it'll recognize a scale factor within the viewport. So you can notice if you go into a viewport, go ahead and double click in it, you can scale it by just doing your mouse wheel, but that of course is giving you a not very good scale factor, okay? So what I'm gonna do is let's go ahead in that viewport, if you did change the scale factor, just type in the word zoom and go to extents. And the reason I wanna do that is get that to fill the viewport, okay? So let's go over, if you have this picture open, you'll notice on the third sheet what I have are what we call zoom scale factor settings for this. Okay, so notice this one is set to what they call a 1xp scale factor. So what that means is that this model is going to be 1-to-1 inside of the viewport. So what I've done up here, I've taken this circle, that circle right there, the smaller circle, and I've scaled that circle up at a scale factor of 2xp. So that means it's 2 times the paper, or 2 times the size. And I've taken this guy right here and I've scaled him at a factor of 1.5 xp. So there's a couple of ways to set these scale factors up. One is to use the zoom command. And if you do the zoom command, then you have to type in the word XP when you do these kind of things. If you go to this last sheet here, you'll see commonly used scale factors for using the zoom command. So for instance, if you have an architectural drawing and you want to scale it at 1/16 of an inch is equal to 1 foot, the zoom XP scale option is 1/92 XP. And the way I'm getting that is I'm setting these units to the same unit. So 1/16 is to 12. And then what I'm doing is setting it for 1 on one side and some value on the other. So for instance, if I set this 1/16 of an inch is equal to 12 inches, then I would multiply both sides by 16. And when I do that, I get 192 and 1. So what you have to do here is you have to then type that in as a fraction. You can type it in as a decimal, but if you do that, if you don't float the decimal value out enough, what you're going to have is problems. So I usually use a fraction like this, 1 over something, but you have to include the XP option when you do this. And notice I've done some for very common factors like engineering and mechanical and those kind of things. So the other thing you're going to see in AutoCAD is it actually has some of these scale factors already built in there for us. If you notice over here in the status bar, well, let me make sure. If you're sitting at paper space, you won't have any scale factors here. But once you jump into a viewport, notice you'll have scale factors. And if you open this guy up right here, those are those scale factors that you're seeing that I just showed you on that sheet. So for instance, we see a 1:1, that's 1 XP. If you notice, we were just talking about a 1/16 of an inch is equal to 1 foot. You'll probably find that down in this list too. So they don't have everything in here, but they do have a lot of them. Now, be careful if you create custom scale factors, you can do that, but there will be people that use that and they don't do it right. Okay, so I usually use the common ones here, or I'll just create my own using the XP scale factors. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create the scale factor 1:1 XP. So we're going to go 1:1 right there. You should notice that this guy changes size within the viewport. So that actually is 1:1 on my paper right now. Okay. Did everybody get that to work that's trying this with me? So you have to be in the viewport and you have to set it. And notice if this one is set properly, it'll tell you down here that it's 1:1. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So this is a very important principle. Once you set your viewport up to its proper scale factor, you need to lock the scale factor. If you don't do that, if I go into this viewport and I hit my mouse wheel, look what I just did. I changed the scale factor. So notice by hitting my mouse wheel, I changed the zoom scale factor, and you can even see it says that's down here. That's true. So actually, prior to about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, something like that, you could not lock your viewports, and it was really a problem because you could just go in there and change it just ever so slightly and not really know it ever. So they do have a way now to lock viewports, and I'm going to show you how to do multiple ways to lock it actually. First of all, I need to get this set back to what it should be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a zoom extents first to bring it back into the size of the viewport, and then I'm going to come here and I'm going to set it 1:1. So now I want to lock it. Well, here's the easiest way to lock it. When you get this set to the proper scale, and notice I'm in the viewport, there's a little lock down here on the status bar now. So what you need to do is you need to click on that and notice it'll lock it. So here's what's happened now. Notice I'm in the viewport and I'm moving my mouse wheel in and out, and notice the whole picture is scaling, but the model is not scaling. Okay, that tells me that it's locked. Unlike this one, which is not locked. Okay, when I come over here, that one's locked. All right, that's the easiest way to lock a viewport. Now I'm going to show you a couple of other methods that you can use. So if you're in paper space, you can click on the viewport, you can right click it, and notice there is a display locked yes, no. Okay, so you have to be in paper space, you click on the viewport, you right click, and you get to a shortcut, and the shortcut will have display locked yes, no. Okay, and that's a nice way of doing it as well. Here's another method. If you click on the object, notice I've got this thing called quick properties that keeps showing up. One of the options within quick properties is this viewport locked yes, no. So that's a good way of doing it. Okay. A fourth method is to go into MView. So if you go into the MView command, MView, Notice one of the options there is lock. So I can select lock. It'll ask me, what do I want to lock? I want to lock on, and then it asks me to select objects. So the advantage to that one is you can lock all of your viewports at one time, because I can just say select all, or I can go in and just do a window like that, and I can select them all and it'll lock them. Okay, so I think the easiest method is to use the little lock down here, but you have to be in the viewport for that to show up. Notice as long as I'm outside of the viewport, if I'm in paper space itself, that changes. Okay, is everybody understanding that? That's really, really important. Okay, I'm going to take that as a yes. All right, so we're going to go up to this viewport and we're going to scale this guy in at a different scale factor. So let's go back to that sheet here. And notice I want to scale this guy at 2xp. All right, so that's 2 times as big. That'll say that that circle is going to be 2 times as big as that circle. Okay, so what I also want to do, and this is a cool little trick if you've never used this, I want to get that circle in the center of this viewport. Okay, so I'm going to do that with 2 methods. I'm going to first do a zoom, and then I'm going to do a scale factor setting. So I'm going to click inside the viewport. You have to double click it, and I'm going to use a zoom, type in Z and hit enter. One of the options under zoom is this guy that's called object. This is a really cool zoom if you've never used it before. So you select object, you select the object you want to zoom, and you hit enter, and it will then zoom that guy in at proper scale factor. Now, when I say proper scale factor, it's not, I should not say that. That's not at the proper scale, but it zoomed that object into the middle of my viewport. So that's a really nice, handy little way. Okay, so I did a zoom object, and I could select multiple objects, by the way. It just depends on what I want to kind of center up. Now, since I'm in this viewport, you'll notice that when it zoomed it in at just some random scale factor to make that fit. So we said that we want this to be 2xp. So we're going to open this guy up and see if there is a 2xp option in here. And there should be a 2 to 1. I'm not seeing mine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a zoom scale factor 2xp. So I'm going to type in zoom, and I'm going to type in 2xp. And you have to make sure that you use the xp after the number. If you don't use the xp after the number, that will do what's called a zoom limits, which is going to not be the right value. So once I hit that, I'm going to hit enter. Notice it changed the scale factor of that, and it says 2 down here. So now I know everything's good, and what I want to do immediately is lock this guy up. So I'm going to go ahead and lock him. And so now this viewport will not zoom, it will not pan. This viewport will also not zoom or pan. Okay, but this viewport, he's still unlocked. All right, is everybody okay with that so far? Any questions?
I'm sorry, I got bumped off again. What was the command? Was it zoom objects?
To get it to fill, I did a zoom object first, and then I did a zoom XP.
Gotcha. And
we're gonna do the same thing down here, Dave.
Okay.
All right. So, and usually you don't necessarily have to do a zoom object. I mean, you can just kind of use your mouse to get it whatever scale you want. If you get it close, you can also pan it. But if you have something that you want to center right in the viewport, like I did here, a zoom object is really convenient. Okay. So I'm going to do the same thing on this guy, but before we do that, I need to find out what scale factor we want for that. So this scale factor I'm using is 1.5 XP, okay? So I'm going to come back here. So what I am going to do is I'm going to do a zoom command, just type in Z. I'm going to do object again. I'm going to select this time the green circle and hit enter. So what that does is that zooms that in at extents view for me in that viewport. And then I'm going to do a zoom 1.5 XP. And after I do that, I hit enter. And it didn't change it much, but notice that it does say down here 1.5 XP. So I want to lock that guy. And now my model is set in all viewports. So once you get it locked, you're good to go typically. If you do need to move it or pan it, you will have to unlock it before you can do that. Because if I try to pan or move in here, it won't do it. All right. And I get in the habit of once I get my model zoomed in where I want it at the proper scale, I usually lock it right away. If you forget to do that, you're going to go in that viewport and you're going to have issues sometimes. Okay. Any questions on that? Okay, so we've created viewports. We've done the zoom scale factors. That's really critical. That little sheet, by the way, this is a real good little sheet. You ought to print that out. I'm going to run copies of this and bring this with me on Wednesday. So you guys that are going to be there, which everybody really should be, I'll bring that with me, okay? All right, so go ahead and if you've got your model like this, make sure that you're in paper space. So if you're in like one of the viewports, just double click outside. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom extents. Okay. So keep in mind now that we've got one model and we're looking at that model with our different views at this point. So what we now want to do is start freezing and thawing layers, because that's the real big thing where you have paper space. You don't want necessarily every layer showing up. Now, I might want all layers up here and then maybe not. Now my viewport clips a lot of those out of there, but for instance on this viewport, I might want to get rid of that red object, okay? So we're going to show you a couple things. If you're at paper space right now, and I go up here to my layer control dialog box and I freeze layer 1, you should notice that it froze across the board. It froze in this viewport, it froze in that viewport, and it froze in that viewport. So that's a global freeze, and it works just like I showed you when we had the tiled viewports. Okay, so that's not necessarily a good thing. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and globally thaw this, and we're going to notice that when we go into a viewport, you're going to see actually another freeze object show up. So notice there's on, off, that's global freeze thaw right there. What's going to happen when we double click inside of this viewport, well, it actually is there. There's another freeze right there. That guy is a freeze and viewport specific, or what I call a viewport layer freeze. So again, if I freeze globally, everything's frozen. If I just freeze in that viewport, notice what's cool about that. It's still it's frozen here, it's thawed here, and it's thawed here. That's unique to paper space. You can't do that any other way. Okay, so what I did was I don't want a global freeze when I'm in paper space. I want a viewport layer freeze. So again, go into the viewport you want to freeze, and make sure you're using this guy right here. This is your viewport layer freeze. So I could go in there and I could freeze layer 3. Even though it's not showing up, I could do that. It's not affecting notice either of those other ones. When I come down to this viewport, I can do the same thing. I want to freeze layer 1. I don't want to globally freeze it. I want to viewport layer freeze it. And I could freeze, let's see, there's another one there, layer 2. All right. So that's a real critical thing. They're very, very important. The other thing that's pretty cool about this now, once you have that set up, they actually have a different color set. So let's notice, go ahead and click in this top viewport now. And if we open up the layer manager, you'll notice that you now have 2 colors. You have 2 line types. You have 2 line weights where you didn't have that before. And what this allows you to do, this color is the color that the object was actually created on, but this is a viewport override color. So for instance, if I'm in this viewport, okay, I can create a different color on this object. Notice that when I click on it, it's the same object, but I can make it, for instance, I can make it magenta in this layer and blue in this layer, or viewport, I should say. So if I go to this guy and I click on layer 2, let's see, for the viewport override layer, I can color, I'm going to make that. Notice what I did is I made that blue here, same object, but it's different colors. And that's kind of a newer thing in the paper space world. So those are called, what I'm doing is I'm overriding the color here. So this color has been overridden. I don't do that too often myself, but it might be something that you guys want to take a look at doing occasionally. All right. By the way, when we get into Civil 3D, there's just a gazillion layers that you manage. So I normally let Civil 3D ride with its own layers and then just leave the colors intact. But you can manage it this way when you get into paper space if you want to. Does everybody get the idea on that? It's a pretty cool concept right there. And also, for instance, notice this is a continuous line type. I could make that a different line type if I wanted to as well, because you have, again, you have color overrides, you have line type overrides, you have line weight overrides. You also have transparency overrides, right? I believe if you click on the viewport and you right click, there's a way to remove, yeah, you can remove the overrides if I just click on that. So that's a convenient way to get rid of the overrides if you don't want them. Okay. Any questions? Okay, so we're almost done with this process now. We've created our model. Okay, so remember, this is your model. We went into the layout. We set it up, generated viewports, zoomed the models in, locked the viewports, set up the layers the way we want them to look. Okay. So now we're going to bring in a title block. So if you guys have your A-size title block available, which by the way is due Wednesday. Okay, so after Wednesday it's late, and everybody pretty much has them done. So if you have your A-size title block handy, we're going to use that. If you don't have your A-size title block or haven't completed it yet, out on my Blackboard site, let's see if you go to this week 2, there's a sample title block you can hold up. So you can just go ahead and download that, and I would bring that over on your desktop. Okay, but if you have your A-size title block handy, we're going to go ahead and use that. Okay, I'll give you guys a sec to go ahead and find that information. Now I have mine located in a particular folder, so I'll have that available. Also keep in mind, we are going to bring this guy in like we did the little logo symbol as a block. So whatever layer is current is the layer that this title block is going to go on. We do not want the title block going on the viewports layer because we have that set to no plot. So right now, if we bring that in on that, it won't plot. That's going to kind of defeat the whole purpose. All right, so I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to set the 0 layer current because I'm going to bring my title block in on the 0 layer. All right, we're going to go into the insert command. So easiest way to get to insert is just type in the letter I, or you can type in the word insert. Okay, so we talked about this on Wednesday, guys. Remember, what we're going to do is go navigate out to find your title block. So I have a title block located out in a folder. So if you have your A-size title block handy, you can click on it. If you don't have your A-size title block, use that sample title block. So I'm going to use my master. That's when my A size title block, hit open, and it should show up on your palette here. Okay. What you can then do is just right click on that and say insert it. And it might float in like this, and what you can do is just kind of line it up, and once you get it in, just click it in. So it should come in like that. And I'm going to go ahead and do a zoom extents. So if you drew your viewports properly, they should fit totally within the boundary of the title block. And so a couple things about viewports. I'll show you some bad practice. All right, this would be bad practice. Does anybody, why is that a bad thing right there? Anybody tell me? What's bad about that? All right, here's the thing. The viewports are outside of the title block. That's a bad thing. The other thing is you'll notice that this viewport is spilling over into the title block itself. And so the model space object is showing up inside the title block. So all of those are bad. That's bad practice. You never want a viewport outside of a title block or a border. So I can just float this guy and get him lined up right where I want him. As long as those guys are not like that, and I don't even like them to touch. So sometimes I'll just bring that guy in so it's just a little bit like that. As long as I have grips on, it's kind of hard to get it. Let's see if I can get that guy to move a little. Okay, so notice the way I've inserted this. I got space here, I've got space here. Some people will actually put their viewports right on the borderline. I don't like to do that either. I always like to see my viewports, okay? Once you have your project, once you have your title block in there, now you can really edit it very simply. Okay, so this thing, if you click on this right now, this is called a block, and we're going to talk about blocks in a couple of weeks. Okay, that block can be edited in place, but I'm going to show you a little bit easier way to do this. If you just click on your title block and then you hit X, it will explode it. So now this object is no longer a block object, it's all separate objects. Definitely suggest don't explode your title block until you've got it kind of where you want it. And also, usually you bring your title block in first and then you generate the viewports. You can probably kind of see why that's true. Because that way I know what space I'm actually creating my viewports in. Okay. All right, so watch how easy it is now. Once we have this thing exploded, you just double click on your piece of text and we can just say, this is a layout demo. So what we have is we have that template. We just go in and edit the things. So this is assignment number, let's say this was assignment number 10. Oops. I just changed the information. Okay, it's drawn by me. The date today is what, the 25th. You get the idea. I can go in and edit all of this stuff. Most of it we won't need to change, other than we'll usually be changing a title, an assignment number, a date. Now very often here you'll say as shown, because you're going to have a scale factor shown on your viewports. That'll be done through a labeling process. But once I get that done, I'm good to go. So you can save this drawing now. And if you guys want to save this to go back and be able to look at it, I mean, I can save this. And it has everything in it. And then you've got it. Okay. Any questions anybody has? it's a little overwhelming at first, but you'll see once you get into it, it's not that big of a deal to use. It takes some getting used to at first, but it's not that hard. Any questions? All right, let's take a look at plotting real quick, and then I want to show you a couple of utilities that you'd be associated with things. Okay, so I'm going to do a zoom extents, and notice, and I just want to mention this too, by the way, this title block is in paper space. There's sometimes people will insert their title block in model space. That's completely wrong, and you're defeating the whole purpose of paper space. So there should be no title blocks in model space. You know, they should always be in your paper space view. Okay, so this is now a paper space object. What we're going to do is we're going to do a zoom extend so we can see our whole drawing file. And we're going to go to the plot command. And it really truly doesn't matter what you set this up to. I'm going to just actually do a PDF real quick. So you can just do what's called a DWG to PDF. Nice, it's kind of nice to look at that. And this is a letter, so this will be an A size. You can do an ANSI A size. It asks me what to plot over here. It does have the layout option, but I still usually typically use extents. Okay, extents. Now the one thing about paper space, it should always be 1-to-1. If you're not plotting properly 1-to-1, then you're not doing it right. Okay, so paper space is always 1-to-1. Never fit to paper and never any other scale factor. So I'm going to go ahead and center the plot. And sometimes it shows me that it's clipping. I don't think it actually will. I'm in landscape. We're going to preview this. Yep, actually it's clipping. And I'm not sure why that's clipping on mine. It's probably because of the settings on the paper. But what you should notice here is that you don't have viewports. No viewport showing up here. No viewport showing up there. No viewport there. That's the ideal way of dealing with viewports, okay? If your viewports are showing up, then you either have them on the wrong layer or you've got that layer turned to a plottable layer. Now you can also freeze the viewports layer, and some people do that. I don't like to do that because I don't see my viewports while I'm working. Okay. Is anybody getting that to work in a preview mode? So obviously mine's clipping.
Mine's clipping too.
Okay, probably what's happening, are you using the PDF thing?
Yes.
Okay, probably, I think there's one that's called expanded. Try the ANSI A expanded and see if that clips. It may or may not. It's not a big deal if it does. It shouldn't print. When we print them at school, they won't clip. I guarantee that. So,
All right.
yeah, so that's not a problem. Are you guys getting this thing produced by a student version on yours?
No,
You are, Teresa? You are?
I am not getting that.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm getting it because I have actually a student edition.
So mine's a student edition. When I looked it up, we talked on Wednesday.
Yeah.
It said they're good for year, but I think you can renew them year to year.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Well, there is a way to get rid of that, by the way. What I have to do is I have to save this drawing as a PDF or as a DXF, and then I have this little extension called Drawing TrueView, and you can open it up in TrueView and it'll get rid of this. So you can print from TrueView. So if anybody has this showing up on their drawing, I'll show you Wednesday how to get rid of it. It's not a big deal. But obviously for commercial use, you wouldn't want this. So, all right, so if you went ahead and did your print right now, it would create a PDF for you. Okay. But we're not worried about that, just so long as everybody gets the idea how that works. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this out, and I'm going to just cancel that. Okay. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I want to show you a couple of things that you can do that are pretty cool with viewports. Again, irregular viewport might be something neat to see. So let's take a look at that. So what we're going to do is go over here and make our viewport layer current. And I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to create a P line. So I'm just going to type in PL for P line. And I just want you to go in and click some random lines. When you get enough in there, make sure you hit C for close. Because when you create any regular viewport, you have to have a closed figure. Okay. And if you're using a P-line command, use this close option. That'll make sure that it works perfectly. Or if you use a circle or something of that nature, it won't be a problem. So for instance, I could draw a circle also. And these two things can become viewports. So if I go into the mView command, notice there's an object option. So you select that object. And if I do that again, go to objects, it'll make viewports out of both of those. And again, you might not think, well, why would I do that? But again, if this was a boundary and it had topo that was extending beyond it, this is a way of clipping stuff out so that you don't need to see stuff. And of course, then you go in and do the zooms just like you do the normal zooms. So that's a really cool function. I actually for surveying applications, I do create occasionally irregular shape viewports. I would say probably 80% of the time I'm using the rectangular type of viewport, but that's not always true. All right, let's show you something else that's pretty cool. If you have an object that exists in model space, you can move it to paper space or vice versa. So for instance, if you have a piece of text that's in model space and you really don't want it in model space, you can move it. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's go to the model space tab. And I'm going to put this on layer 1. So make layer 1 current. What we're going to do is we're just going to put a piece of text right in the middle here. So I'm going to go into the dtext command, just type in dt or dtext. And I'm going to use a middle piece of text. And I'm going to send that to the center of that right there. And I'm going to go ahead and let it be 0.2 units high. And the rotation will be 0. And we're just going to just type in it. It doesn't really matter what the character. I'm just going to be ABC. Yeah. Okay, so I just got a piece of text for whatever reason. And my text is coming out. I must have another text in there. Let me see. Yeah, I've got a bunch of different types of text in there. So I'm going to move mine to Times New Roman. It doesn't matter, just so long as we get some text in there. So notice there's my text right there. But maybe I don't want that actually in that space. Okay, so there is a command called change space, and it's CHSPACE. So if you double click inside of the viewport, we're going to type in the word change space, CHSPACE, hit enter, select that text object, and then hit enter twice. It doesn't look like it changed, but if you click on it, notice now that it is in paper space. And when I go back to model space, it's no longer there. So I can take an object that's in paper space and move it to model space, or I can take an object that's in model space and move it to paper space. That's actually really cool little utility. The other thing that it does is when you move it, you might notice that it was a certain height here. It retained that height when it moved it into paper space. So it's really cool. It actually is very intuitive the way it works. Particularly with things like dimensioning, which we're going to be talking about dimensioning next week. What's really cool with paper space is that you can dimension your model either in model space or you can dimension it actually on paper space. And what that allows you to do is keep your dimensions separate from your model. And that's also a really really, really nice way of doing things. Okay, really nice way of doing things. Okay. Any questions? Oh, I do want to
When
show
will
you.
you have the the video out?
Oh, how soon?
Yeah.
It shouldn't take me very long. It takes, when I get done with this, I just have to, it has to format it, which takes maybe 10, 20 minutes.
Okay, I got a few things correct.
And then when I link it back up to YouTube, YouTube has to process it.
Okay.
I would say within an hour after we get done here, it'll be posted. Okay.
Gotcha.
And I'll have a little link in this week. Okay. So I'll have a lecture link, and you just click on it, and it'll take you to another link. You click on it, and it should open it up in YouTube for you. Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So we'll do that. We're going to do that every week, so that every time we do a lecture via Zoom, I'll make sure that I record them and get them up there. Okay. So that they'll be good to go for you. And here's the other thing also. Always know that I'm available to do a one-on-one Zoom conference with anybody, okay? And that can work really, really well, all right? Particularly as we get into Civil 3D. There's gonna be a lot of stuff going on in Civil 3D, so we're gonna be building as we go. So those videos will be available to you all semester as well, okay? Anybody else, questions? Okay,
Hey,
one thing.
James.
Yeah.
I got a question. For whatever reason, my Zoom sound is not working through my school email, so I'd load into my work email. But I am trying to insert the drawing, my A drawing.
Uh-huh.
For whatever reason, it says local server is loading, and it won't actually load in my drawing through
Okay.
insert.
Let me try this. Can you copy that drawing down to like your desktop?
Yeah, that's what I did, and so it's copied onto my desktop.
Okay, so then did you go to insert?
Yep, I went to insert, and I'm in there right now.
Does it show up on your palette like that?
No, it does not.
Okay, do you see these three dots up here?
For whatever reason, it's not giving me that option because I was looking for those, but I can't find them.
Okay, gonna show you another way around it then, okay?
Okay.
Type in DD insert for me. Get this
Okay.
dialog box?
Yep, that popped up.
Do you see browse?
Yep.
Click on browse.
Okay.
Now navigate to your drawing.
And then just hit open.
Yep. And it should come right in, actually. I mean, you're going to have to hit OK, but it should come in.
Okay, now it's asking for an insertion point.
Yep. Just basically, you should see it floating around.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so you just drag it where you want it and then click.
Okay. It's extremely small for whatever reason.
Did you draw it 1-to-1? Well, I know you did because I just looked at
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so-
drawn 1-to-1.
Are your viewports really big?
Here, let me.
I tell you what
Yeah.
I think's going on. Okay. It probably is the wrong scale factor because of units. Let's go to units real quick, okay? Just type in
Okay.
units. What's your insertion scale say?
Feet.
Okay, that's your problem. Either set it to unitless or inches.
Okay, I'll put it on unitless and then just hit OK.
Yep.
Okay. So, and then,
And then
do you want me
delete your title block that's in there.
okay. And then DD insert
Yep.
there.
Go find it, open it, and it'll probably tell you it already exists. Do you want to redefine it and say yes?
Okay, I found it now. All right. Now I just have to like, cause it's not rotated the right way. It's like straight up and down versus horizontal.
No problem. What you can do is just bring it in, click on
Uh-huh.
it, just bring it in, and then when you get it in, you can just click on it and you get a grip in one of the corners.
Okay.
You can just click on the grip and if you hit the space bar twice, it'll go to rotate.
Okay. I clicked on it. So I clicked on it once
Is it
and
grip?
no, there are no grips on it.
Okay, here's what you do, no problem. Just type in RO for rotate.
Oh,
Select
rotate.
block.
RO, rotate. Select the block. Okay.
And then hit enter. Asking you for a base point.
Yes.
Select a base point anywhere, it doesn't really matter.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
And then your rotation will either be 90 or -90, depending on which way you're rotating it.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
And then I just try and fit it in there as best as possible.
Yeah, you can just
Okay.
eyeball it in.
Okay.
Just keep in mind what I said. Normally, we bring in the title block first,
Right.
and then we draw the viewports within it. Okay.
Okay.
So I kind of did it backwards, but it was
Right.
more or less to explain the process than it was to look at that aspect of it. Does that
Okay.
make sense?
Yep. All right. I'll just type in the project and the assignment, and I should be up to date. So.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. Anybody else questions? It's going to take, listen guys, it's going to take you a little bit time to get your feet on the ground with paper space, but once you do it a couple times, you'll see it's just the best thing in the world, and it's real easy to use. Any questions then? Okay, let me show you then what we're going to be looking at for our lab. And if you guys want to go ahead and get started on this for Wednesday's lab, you can. I wouldn't get too far into the process, but you can look at it if you want. So let me go back to my this. I don't have this assignment open yet, but you do have this. I'll make this open today. And there's going to be this assignment 2. All right. So what we're going to be doing is creating a model in model space, full scale. And that's, by the way, everything you do in model space always happens at full scale. Now, when I say that, Civil doesn't do that. Okay, we set it basically to 1 inch in Civil 3D, and we say that 1 inch is 1 foot. So for us, we are drawing full scale. But if you're working with an architect, you're not drawing full scale. Okay, you're 12 times smaller, just understand that. But we in general always draw full scale. So what we're going to be drawing is, if I scroll down here, we're going to be creating this typical section, which everybody should be familiar with. And it's a full depth pavement with a curb. It has a slope sodded area, and it has a sidewalk. So we're going to generate this model in model space, and notice you have this curve and then this curve and this curve. This is all the same model. So we're going to generate this curb layout in model space, and we're going to be doing that with 3 viewports. And this is going to utilize your B-size title block. So that's why that's important. And like I said, I think I have 4 people that have turned this in so far. You're in good shape. The people that don't have it turned in, you're behind the 8 ball, and it is due Wednesday, okay? So if you want to get started working on this, what you need to do, it's kind of hard for, let me see if I can rotate this. I think I can. Yeah, rotate it. All right. So you want to start out with this concrete curb and gutter section first. If you don't get this right, your whole model is going to be wrong, okay? And what you need to notice is I would probably start at that corner right there, and you're going to draw this line here up and over. So that thing is 31 feet horizontally in the X and 1 up in the Y. So make sure that you get that slope right. The other thing you want to do is draw this line straight up 12 inches, right? That's kind of your basis. Then you're going to come, this guy right here is up 7 inches and over 1 inch, because the difference between 31 and 30 gets me that slope. And the slope on this line, the distance from here to here is 13.5 inches horizontally. And then the difference between these two will get you the vertical drop. So you have to make sure you get that line, that line, that line, and that line correct. Okay. So here's how you approach the arcs. What I would do is draw this circle first. The circle is going to have a center point right there. So just draw a circle that has a radius of 12 inches. So you're going to have a circle coming around like this. And then you're going to fill it, this circle, with this line using a radius of 21 inches. So once you do that, it'll generate that arc for you. You can trim that circle out. Okay. Everything is based on getting this thing correct. All right. That's very important. All right. Then you can build this sodded area. It's 1 inch per foot. That's your slope rate for 7 feet. So you can connect a line coming off this way. You're going to have a sidewalk. And the pavement is probably the hardest piece. So, you know, you guys might want to wait until Wednesday to help. But I think if you get it like drawn up, bring it in, I mean, we can make sure we go through it. You do not need any of those hatchings in there. You will need these dowels though. Those are 1 inch dowels. When you get this thing created, the pavement, the curb, the sodded area, and the sidewalk, what you'll do is you're going to select these guys and then mirror it so that you'll have a full depth thing. Okay. And then we're going to go into the paper space. So the idea, of course, is that you'll be with me on Wednesday so that we can go through this together. Okay. Follow the directions also. Let me rotate that back. I have very definite order of things that you're going to do. First off, make sure that you're drawing this in architectural units, because we're drawing this thing exact. So that's that pavement is 50 feet from right-of-way to right-of-way, that typical section. So you're actually going to have a 50-foot piece of pavement is what that is. Make sure that you create these layers with the proper names, colors, and line types. So you're going to have to load 2 line types. You're going to have to load the center line type and the phantom line type. Make sure that you create a viewport layer. That's for your floating viewports. And I would set it to no plot. You do not need to create the border layer, the text layer, and the logo layer, because when you insert your title block, these are going to come in with it. Okay. So don't create these, but you'll need to create everything from viewport down. So, you know, your curb will be on the curb layer, pavement, ground, sidewalk. So if I look at this picture, this is your curb, that'll be on the curb layer. This is your sodded area, so that'll be on the ground layer. This is your sidewalk, that's your sidewalk layer, and this is your pavement layer. Okay. So anybody has any questions on this, you don't necessarily have to get started on this today. In fact, you might want to revisit the lecture and maybe even go through that paper space stuff again on your own, just looking at the lecture. I think that would be really helpful, so that when we get into this drawing here, we'll be inserting our B-size title block, creating 3 viewports. Word about the text too, just because we'll get to that piece when we see it, but this text all is occurring in paper space. So none of this text, if I go to my model, I won't see any of this stuff, okay? In fact, the title block will be in paper space as well. So the only thing that's going to be in model space is this sidewalk, sod, curb, pavement, and then the same thing on the other side. And you can actually choose to put these lines in model space or in paper space. I think I put my lines on the model, but that's going to be kind of up to you, okay? So this is what we're going to be working on Wednesday. Next week, on Monday, we're going to be going over dimensioning, which is a bit more of a topic. There's a lot to dimensioning, and we don't need to do a ton of it, but I'm going to show you how to do dimensions and multi-liters. And we're going to actually take this drawing that we have created, and we're going to use this to do the dimensioning from. So it's going to be important to keep up with this. So this one, hopefully, will be due by next Monday, kind of thing. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on anything? No questions?